Hello and welcome to Henry Weston's Old Mate. You are very welcome. It's good to be back. I'm Phil Walton. I'm your host. We are on episode 6. I'm going to say 6.
Yes.
Definitely 6. Episode 6, which is part 2 of episode 5. So that's confusing enough. So Stu Butler is back. How are you doing, Stu? Good evening.
Yeah, I am back. I am very well, mate. I am repping Den Bosch Football Club tonight. A fairly big city in Holland. I used to live just outside it. No one will have ever seen the Den Bosch Dragon. So there we go.
Excellent.
But all very good, mate.
Of your kits.
Yes, one of my numerous ones. We'll run a little quiz, see if everyone can name every shirt at the end of the series. See how many episodes we run.
That will be entirely biased to the YouTube viewers rather than the podcast listeners, who will at an obvious disadvantage.
Yeah, well, the podcast listeners have just got a freebie because I've told
them. Good. How's your week been? Well, it's been close to a week since we last spoke. So
yeah, really. Good. Obviously, I'm still running. Didn't want to run today. Didn't want to do my 3 miles. Spent a few hours moving sand around the bunkers. As anyone who knows me in my work environment will know, I am not a fan of bunkers, but it needed doing. But we got out, done the 3 miles. Good weekend. It's Monday today, just on the back of a good weekend. All is well. Worked all weekend. Well, worked in the mornings. So feel a little bit tired, but there you go. Can't complain. All good.
And still sober?
Yes, still sober. Had a bit celebrating a wedding anniversary today, so I had a non-alcoholic German wheat beer with my dinner, but that's as close as we get to any form of beer nowadays.
That's good. We might come on to this another time, but and actually you've done a podcast about it before, so which might be worth directing people to it. But I guess being able to enjoy, if you enjoy the taste of a beer, there's so many more options.
Yes. So we'll copy the link to episode 1 of Henry Weston's Old Mate. John Brown runs the Deal Tap House. Just hit 2 years sobriety, actually. He's very keen on all beer, but he doesn't drink the alcoholic stuff anymore. But he very much promotes non-alcoholic beer. So head to Henry Weston's Old Mate the podcast and look at episode 1 if that's your thing.
Cool. Nice little plug.
Yes.
Was rehearsed. So let's go on to part 2 of episode 5 or episode 6. How we want it. We should have rehearsed that, shouldn't we? So let's recap really on the last episode, which we're continuing through. And really, we spent a lot of time on the last episode talking about kind of your manifestation of anxiety and how it was living that experience for you. We talked about the paranoia. We talked about, drinking was a big thing for you in respect of getting you to sleep.
Very much so.
And then, you struggle with your sleep. You've got a job that starts really early in the morning. So actually your opportunities to get a decent rest and then working on autopilot all the time, Red Bull and caffeine tablets playing a big part in your day. And then we move through to talking about kind of the social arena that we're in at the moment, or the societal arena that we're in respect of progress that's being made in men's mental health. And social media is doing quite a bit to push that forwards. And there is much more awareness of it. But I think there is, and I think this is what we touched on, or didn't even touch on, we went full throttle into it, really. There is quite a gap between awareness and acceptance.
Yeah, that's very well put, Phil. Anyone who has listened or watched episode 5, the last few minutes, a minor Stuart rant, I may have suggested that I didn't think any progress had been made in my years of sobriety, which, sort of listening back, may have been a little bit unfair. I actually discussed it with the guys at work today, a couple of guys. And we came to the conclusion that awareness has been raised, certainly in recent years. Again, we are our little microclimate of our work shed. But certainly one of the guys I was talking to is very much more aware of anxiety and what anxiety can be. You know, it's not just feeling a little bit potentially uptight, having things on your mind, can't concentrate on things. You know, he was, you know, aware with some experiences, not personal experiences, but experiences of people close to him, how debilitating anxiety can be. You know, how it can stop you doing things. It's not just something that will tire you out because you know you're thinking about things. But I still stand by some of my statement that I feel a lot more could be done. I'm a man, so within the male environment, we're not very good at talking about things, are we? But have we been led to believe or grown up believing that we shouldn't talk about things? I don't know. I think you said the other day, it's you know, it's, I can't remember the words you used for it, but it's a leap of faith, I think you said.
Yeah.
And it's a leap that a lot of people might not be willing to take because they don't, you know, if you jump and you're not sure where you're going to land, then a lot of people won't jump.
Yeah. If you jump and you land in the wrong spot, if we stretch that analogy, that can be quite damaging as well. You've got to have supreme confidence. And I think we're probably in that generation as well, that's that bridging the gap between one state and another. So our parents probably weren't open with their emotions. Our dads probably weren't that open with their emotions. Talk about how, you know, their anxieties and their worries and fears. They certainly didn't share. Well, mine didn't share his with me.
No, mine neither. No.
Yeah, so we're probably in that generation that needs to start setting the standard, being the role models for the next generation, and being open about kind of the mental challenges of just being a human. But and everyone has them. So okay, so I think we've rode backwards enough on that rant, and we're okay. No, and I think you raised some really valid points that, you know, I think we recognise that progress has been made. It absolutely has been made, particularly in the raising of awareness. But there isn't a ceiling to this, and we're nowhere near the ceiling. If there was one, there's still much more work to do in that area. And I think, you know, we talked about it as well in respect of, you know, the acceptance around I can't come to work because I've broken my leg versus I can't come to work because I'm depressed.
Yeah.
They land very differently with employers.
Completely different planet.
Yeah. So, okay. So from there, we're going to stay on anxiety for a little bit, because I think there is a fork in the road, really, when it comes to anxiety. There are two different kind of paths that present themselves, and we've spoken a lot about living with anxiety, and it's kind of like over a period of time. But then there's the more acute stage, and that's the anxiety attack, which is immediate and paralyzing in some cases. You had experience of that, and if so, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, well, the first time, the first time I had an anxiety attack, I thought I didn't know what I didn't know if I was having a heart attack. I didn't know if I was. It was me and my boss were at a meeting, an irrigation meeting at a local. I think it was called an irrigation breakfast at a local golf club.
That sounds pissing contest.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, well, it was a nice meeting with a lot of people I knew. Some I didn't, but I didn't feel anxious going into the meeting. I was quite looking forward to it. I sat next to a person I knew well. Felt very comfortable. The meeting started, and about 10 minutes into the meeting, I got very hot. My breathing didn't become laboured, but I felt a tight chest. And I excused myself, and I went down to the gentleman's locker room. and thought I was having a heart attack. I don't know what a heart attack feels like. But I splashed water on my face. I actually locked myself in a toilet cubicle, and lay down, elevated my feet. I don't know if that's the right thing to do but I just didn't know what was going on, and I composed myself. After about 15 minutes, went out and got some fresh air. Funnily enough, the front door locked itself behind me, so I had to buzz myself back in. And I got my composure, and I went back up to the meeting, and it happened again about 5 minutes after I'd sat down. I walked to my car. I'd have probably, if someone had seen me walking to my car, they'd have probably thought I was either drunk or dying. Drove home. It was 2 miles from home. I got halfway home and had to stop along DLC front because I actually couldn't feel my left leg operating the clutch. And I sat for about 45 minutes on DLC front. Realised I probably wasn't having a heart attack because I'd assumed I'd have either been dead or in an ambulance by then. I managed to get home, lay on the bed, and started feeling normal about an hour and a half later. And I assumed it was a panic attack. It only happened twice more like that in my drinking days, but that was very scary. And yeah, just very, very, because like I say, I didn't approach that meeting with any apprehension. It just came out of nowhere.
It's odd, isn't it? It is really odd, because I think that I think what you've just described are kind of classic symptoms, and I can relate to those where I've had, and often my anxiety attacks have been in relation to managing people. And there's one or two people that I've had, I've found them problematic to manage because they're good arguers, and they can be, they can lack civility, so they can just make your life really, really hard. And trying to plan those conversations to have with people, a couple of times I've, like I say, heart rate up, short of breath, felt giddy,
I felt weak at the knees.
Yeah. And then, a couple of times it's led to vomiting as well. And it's just like, fuck, I don't know what's happening here, because you lack any sort of control, and then panic sets in. Like I say, it feels like you're having some sort of cardiac event, and when you've got no control like that, the panic sets in, and that actually makes it so much worse, because you're just
I didn't know. I didn't know if I was meant to. Well, again, potentially being a man, I don't know if that's the right thing to say, but I excused myself to go and deal with it quietly. So had I been having a heart attack, they'd have found me downstairs in the cubicle half an hour later dead. But I don't think that was shame. I just confusion potentially. I just didn't know what was going on, and I assumed in my head I'll get myself somewhere quiet and I'll try and compose myself. But
So anxiety attacks only happened on a handful of occasions, less than a handful?
Yeah, I remember I had a smaller variant of that when I was out for a walk with I think I'd left work early. Probably there was one coming on, and I'd left work and I stopped at my mum's, and she said, "Shall we go for a walk?" And about halfway, on the walk, something came over me again, not quite so bad. And I remember I had one. I had numerous ones. The last weekend, we'll get to the week I stopped drinking, but my wife was away, and I suffered about 3 major ones in the space of 2 hours. I remember phoning my wife I don't remember the exact words, but I think I'm dying, along those lines. I think this is worse than I've ever felt. I've had these before, but
Okay. And then I guess, so further to that, were you experiencing any other kind of physical symptoms or signs that go not just from an anxiety attack point of view, but living with anxiety? So the general picture, And when I talk about physical symptoms, yeah, we might have, the racing heart and the sweatiness and those sorts of things, but people's like eating habits change as well with anxiety. You can either go one way or the other. You can lose your appetite, or you can just be full on kind of conveyor belt feeder.
Yeah, I lost my appetite.
Right.
Towards the end, I developed some rather nasty sores in my mouth, which weren't pleasant, obviously self-inflicted. I lived off, and sparing amounts, but I lived off Parma ham and Haribo, and I didn't consume many of those. But it wasn't a craving. I think the Parma ham is obviously very thin and it doesn't take much to get into you. And the Haribos were similar. You get a couple of them into me, but my appetite completely went. I've written in blogs that I was, over the period of the last 6 to 8 months, I was really pushing my dinner around. I would serve myself smaller portions and eat what I thought I could, what I thought was acceptable to appease whoever I was eating with, because obviously I had to be seen to be eating something, or questions would have been asked. It goes back to what we discussed in the last episode. I was just always calculating. If a plate of food was put in front of me, I'd have no inclination to eat any of it, but the mind would be telling me, well, eat some of it and questions probably won't be asked.
Okay. So once you're living with this, like from an anxiety point of view, and it goes on long enough, it's not uncommon for you to get a diagnosis of depression, which is longer term kind of position, I guess. Did you find yourself in that boat?
I mean, depression. I assume I must have been depressed. I don't know the difference. I could go on Google now and the definition of anxiety and depression. I was taking my citalopram for anxiety, but I mean the state of my mental state was beyond that. I think I was in a if you'd asked me how I felt, I'd have told you I felt massively depressed constantly. Not massively anxious. I just felt depressed all the time with spells of heightened anxiety on top of that. So
okay. So I guess the reason I kind of bring that bit up is that it wouldn't be uncommon for men with anxiety traits. It leads into depression and then suicidal ideation. So whether that's wanting, like the urge to kill yourself, or the fantasy around, so thinking about, I just want this to end. And whether that's not uncommon at all. And I think I have stories to tell in those areas as well. But your story and your timeline around that, did you go down that route?
No, I mean, I never wanted to die, and I never had thoughts of not being around. But again, not a quote of mine, or it might be a quote of mine. I didn't want to die, but I was doing a pretty shit job of living. I knew I was drinking myself to death, but I didn't want to die. I had a young, well, she would have been not a newborn, but I had a young daughter and wife. I still do, thankfully. And I knew that my 1-year-old, coming up for 1-year-old, would be without a dad. I knew I was going to die, but I didn't. Very hard to explain, isn't it? I didn't want to die, but I knew I was dying, or I knew I was drinking myself to death. But had sort of someone asked me, or someone given me a gun and said, "Oh, you can end it all now," I'd have thrown it back at them and said, no, I want to be alive, but I don't know how to stop this. I didn't know how to stop putting the poison into my body. The addiction was towards the end. the addiction was so strong that at the times when I knew this was killing me, but it's still going in there.
Yeah.
All the time.
So, and again, that is absolutely fascinating in that you're able to kind of talk about the awareness of what you're doing to yourself, but helpless to stop it.
Yeah, and it's strange because although, like I say, I said I knew I was dying, I never had visions of my wife and child being on their own, or I never had visions of my funeral. And some people discuss how they look at their own funeral and want to see who's going to miss them or who's not too bothered. I never had that sort of how would my funeral look, because I didn't want to be dead, but I didn't know how to stop myself doing what was killing me.
Yeah, and I think the state of mind at that time. So, share a little bit from my experience. The state of mind there, you can, like, when I'm thinking back to it today, I'm a different person with a different mindset. So there was a time when I was struggling with anxiety, struggling with depression, and I was very clear that I was not contributing as a human to my family and to my kids. And actually, it got to the point where I was like, things are better off if I wasn't here. And there was 2 occasions where I've left the house where I was certain I wasn't coming back, and one of them where I was close to acting on it. It was only when that I actually expressed the fantasy, and I was clear with what I was going to do and how I was going to end it. I spoke to my wife about it, and I think she was so shocked that I was so matter of fact that it's funny that you can get a GP appointment really quickly if you say you're suicidal, and then you get access to the rapid access, the crisis unit.
Yeah.
And you go and have an assessment there, and you go through. That shook me up a little bit, going into speak to people about whether I am a risk to myself or others, and whether I'm going to be sectioned or not.
Yeah.
But you look like, you think about it now, you can justify absolutely anything. Like, so whether it's, I know that I'm going to kill myself by drinking myself to death, but I can't do anything about it, or I can put it into my head as Phil that my family are better off without me because I can't even get myself out of bed in the morning, let alone look my children in the eye.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's those crisis points, isn't it? Those periods where you've got absolutely no, I don't know, your mind is just playing tricks on you, and it takes you to a completely different place.
Yeah, and I think in my circumstance, because with anxiety and the depression and the being drunk a hell of a lot of hours, every day, I had very few moments of clarity, sort of every 24 hours, and those moments, if I did have a moment of, so maybe something good had happened, my wife had good news, or something on the and maybe even something silly as a sports team had a win, and I was in a reasonable mental place, and I'd have thought about, come on, get your act together, this isn't good. 3 drinks later, the mind is, those thoughts are vanished. They've gone until the next day or until the next week, when you think, oh, come on, let's get this in order, or we can stop this. That feeling of that good feeling, we could have a lot more of this, but the urge to put the alcohol back in my body, or any clarity subsided very quickly when the alcohol hit the bloodstream, I guess.
Yeah. So getting help.
Yeah.
So there are ways out of this, in terms of, so you've talked about being on medication and citalopram, which I get from my position on it is it's part of a bigger picture of treatments that can support. So yes, it brings the chemicals in your brain to an appropriate level that can help you
Yeah.
kind of out of your anxiety or your depression. But there are other things like talking therapy, CBT, those sorts of things. Now, you've kind of touched on it before in that actually you were lying to medical professionals about the cause of your anxiety, really.
Yeah.
So did you enter into those and they didn't work because you just weren't in a place to be talking about what was really going on?
Yeah, I was offered and accepted a course of 6 counselling sessions on the NHS through my GP. I attended. I think they were actually in a room at my GP surgery. But the problems, as we discussed again in the last episode, it appears that I've had bouts of anxiety at numerous times over my life. But I wasn't honest about how heightened all my anxieties were through my magnificent alcohol consumption daily. So the first couple of sessions, they weren't great, but they offered something. But the last 4 that I attended, all 6, but the last 4 were me just telling the gentleman what I got a few things off my chest, but had he known the cause of I'm sure he could have, in his professional manner, could have helped me. But he was at a disadvantage because I didn't tell him I was drinking a bottle of vodka a day. And yeah, struggling with alcoholism.
Okay. Have you been back to those types of treatments since being sober?
No, I've got a cognitive brain therapy book. Read the first paragraph. I do that with a lot of books. Never got into that. No, I found that the AA meetings worked really well for me.
Okay.
And in the last year of sobriety and recovery, I have found writing and the exercise, the running. But no, I have not returned to. I've not had any counselling sessions in sobriety. No.
Okay. I was just wondering, kind of compare and contrast, kind of actually whether they are beneficial for you if you're open and honest, but you've not been back. So
Yeah.
that question.
That's what this is, Phil.
Yeah, there we go. You're welcome. I'll charge £50 an hour.
Do you have PayPal?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so in which case then therapy isn't working because you have to buy into it. So what were your coping strategies other
Drinking.
apart from the drinking, yeah, which was like bury your head in the sand, have a drink.
The honest truth is the hiding away and distancing myself from absolutely, dealing with anybody else. Like we mentioned before, I tried to do everything I could to work on my own. I would get in early and get out of the shed, as soon as once the jobs were given out, or if I knew what I was doing, I would get out as soon as I could get out. And that's it, really. I avoided. Yeah, if we were invited to things. My wife attended many sort of social things on her own, a few weddings, etc. Yeah, I think that's it, really. I coped by hiding. But yeah.
Again, it's not uncommon, isn't it? If you're able to remove yourself from any sort of stimulus that might provoke anxiety, then that's something that you do have control over. Rather facing, human beings are pre-programmed to take the path of least resistance, and I guess if you think about that fight or flight response that is often what you feel in an anxiety state, then you're always going to take the flight option, aren't you?
Yeah, and it goes back to the sort of the lies, the deceit, the deception episode 2 or 3. That was, I think. I had the anxiety diagnosis and medication to fall back on. Shall we go and do this, Stu? I'm just, I'm having a bad day. I think I'll stay behind. Front door goes, check the window, blooming top off the side of the bottle. Here we go again. It was always going to happen, but it made it very easy. That anxiety, I was anxious, but that facilitated a lot of drinking, and it allowed me to facilitate a situation where I was able to drink.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we've kind of, over the last 2 episodes, we've kind of built a picture which hasn't necessarily been about drinking per se, but I think because chicken and egg scenario, really, that anxiety, alcoholism, sleep, and all of those things building in together create kind of quite a vicious circle, and it's kind of really been worth kind of delving into anxiety as a separate issue from the drinking, but acknowledging the enormous kind of the link that was there. So anything around, because I think from that point of view, I think we've delved into it as much as we really can. But is there anything else from a mental health point of view that you wanted to talk about? We can label this any other business if you want, but is there anything else?
I mean, we've covered. I think it's it would be correct or right to point out that my spells of mental unrest, my spells of anxiety have not gone away in sobriety. But what I have found, obviously, being sober, being able to make more efficient or reasoned decisions, I have been able to cope much better as any, you take, as we all know, trying to do anything drunk it's a lot easier trying to do something when you're not drunk. But that mental health issue has not gone away. I've been unmedicated for a period, I think, of 2 years probably now. But again, I believe I wrote about it not too long ago. I actually experienced in sobriety probably a period of 3 to 4 months where my mental health deteriorated in early sobriety because my coping mechanism of 20 years had been removed. So I then had to learn new skills, and and we used the term white knuckling it last episode, and those early days of sobriety and mental health, I was white knuckling it through learning how to deal with having a good day followed by a bad day. I didn't know what to do. I'd have turned to the bottle, or I didn't have that. I was on the medication, so I think my medication actually sort of the dosage upped in the initial months in sobriety. And it's hard, isn't it? It's someone watching this who's thinking they'd like to cut down on their alcohol or maybe stop drinking. They might listen to the last 5 minutes and think, well, balls to that. It sounds like a lot of hard work,
Well, yeah. Well, I guess it might well be a lot of hard work to cut down or to stop. But if you don't, it's going to catch up with you.
Yeah, we will. Yeah,
which is the point of what we're talking about. And I think there is giving things up like alcohol. It's not going to be easy, and there will be consequential effects. I was going to say side effects, but I don't want to kind of conflate the two. but there will be consequential effects in that is, for many people, that's a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And as such, you're going to have to think long and hard about how you're going to replace that. Some people will turn to exercise, some people will turn to eating, some people will turn to whatever.
Yeah, you put a bit of weight on when you stop drinking, but that's the way it goes. But we should probably say now that, not probably say, but it'd be good to say now that it's if you are worried about your alcohol consumption and you're watching this, if you're worried about your alcohol consumption, then you are probably drinking too much. If it's just nibbling away at the back of your mind, but you don't have to stop, and you might not be able to stop straight away, but speak to someone. I say it in all my blogs. Speak to someone. GPs, I was amazed, and I've never been scared to go to the doctor, but I was amazed at how brilliant my GP was. She's retired now, but she was fantastic. I don't know why I thought maybe she wouldn't be, but had I spoke to friends and family, of course that would have helped, but you only, in the middle of a bender or in the middle of an anxious spell, the last thing you want to do is say to your wife, I've been secretly drinking a bottle of vodka for the last 8 months, and your daughter's only been alive 10 months, because you think she's going to pack a bag and walk out. You've got no, it's not it's not fair to judge someone on that, but you just think, if I tell someone this, then they're going to tell me to fuck right off, and I'll be on my own, or that's what I thought. But I don't know if we've gone off topic here, but help is out there. You just need to ask for it. It's the hardest thing in the world, isn't it? And again, I don't know if it's from a male standpoint. I might get a lot of comments, stop going on about being a man. But our men, we find it hard to talk about our feelings. It's hard. It's hard to go to the doctor and say, I'm struggling. I found it easier to go to the doctor and say I'm struggling, because it meant I didn't have to go to the doctor and say I'm drinking too much.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think I echo those comments as well, in the respect of, when I mentioned earlier on about needing to see, when you need the GP and it's something fucking serious.
Yeah.
They're very, very good. Very good.
They're brilliant.
Yeah, you get access to things when you need them. It's and particularly when it's crisis. My experience has been very positive from that point of view, and I think I agree wholeheartedly in, like, if you think that you might be drinking too much, that you're drinking too much. There isn't a measure or a way of kind of, typing into the computer, am I drinking too much? Because as soon as you've started writing that, then the answer should be yes straight away.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of ways of getting help. So
there are. I mean, drop us an email, contact, speak to your nearest and dearest. It's a cliche, but they'd rather hear about it than, read about you not being around anymore. It is as simple as that. And if you think you'll do, I'll keep repeating it, if there is the slightest inclination in your brain that you are doing something that is detrimental to your health, then you are.
Yeah.
It's absolutely. Yeah. And I'm not the alcohol police. I would still like to be able to enjoy alcohol. That's just, you don't have to stop drinking. But, if you're coming home from work and having, 4 or 5 cans of beer 4 or 5 times a week, that's too much.
Yeah.
on top of, your weekend excess because it's the weekend and I've had a long week at work. But we don't want to go down the rabbit hole because that's not my place to say. But please speak to someone.
Absolutely. Okay, let's wrap it up. It feels like it's quite a serious note. I feel like I should try and add in a dad joke or something, but I'm going to resist the urge, because it will detract from the importance of what we were just talking about. So we'll catch up again later this week. I don't know what our session. I think we're getting closer and closer to kind of phase 2 of the Butler experience, which is kind of the admission and the realization that if you don't stop now, you're going to stop in life.
Yes, what we will get to very quickly, and it's we're not encouraging. This isn't. Well, it is a bit of a cliffhanger, but the end of my drinking crept up on me unbelievably quickly, and with a unbelievably scary, health scare. We will go over it all in most of its gory, well, in probably all of its gory detail, but we're getting very close to that. But then the good thing about that is then we will move on to all the positive stuff and everything that I have achieved. I haven't achieved huge amounts, but I have made some very impressive strides over. We're coming up on 4 years now. It took a long time to get there, but there's a lot of this story still to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like Stuart said, if you've got questions or if you want to reach out, particularly to Stu, because he's got the lived experience, then
if I point like this, then when I do the video edit, I can put a nice little look at that, and then I'll put one just above my finger.
Okay, podcast listeners can enjoy that. HWOMthepod@gmail.com is the email address. So feel free to reach out at Stu Butts as well on Twitter. Just we'd be pleased to hear from you, whatever it's about. But until later on in the week, we might be doing an international broadcast later in the week.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I'm in Northern Ireland. It's not quite international, but I'm in Northern Ireland later in the week, so we can probably, as long as the Wi-Fi stands up, we'll probably be able to do another recording. Until then, keep well, Stu, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Phil. I'll catch up with you soon, mate.
Cheers, pal.